So very good evening, everyone. I hope you all can clearly hear our voice. So my name is Budit Legaratne, and on behalf of SLTC Faculty of Postgraduate Studies and Research, so I warmly welcome you all to the today's webinar, Driving Competitive Advantage Through Supply Chain Excellence. So as you all know, so due to the rapid development in technology, transportation, and infrastructure, so managing supply chain is the one of the key factor to gain competitive advantage. So this is a very important concept, and those who manage supply chain effectively and efficiently, they are the leaders in the market. So this is a very important topic we need to discuss. So we have invited to discuss this topic in detail one of the best resource person in the country. So she is none other than Mrs. Gayani De Alwis. So Mrs. Gayani De Alwis is a multi-award winning supply chain professional with over 20 years of experience in local and global leadership roles. So she has held various leadership roles in both locally and internationally. So she currently working as a chairperson of the Women's Chamber of Industry and Commerce. And also she's a founding chairperson of WILAT, which is Women in Logistics and Transportation in Sri Lanka. And also she's a USA certified supply chain manager and only Sri Lankan fellow member of both CILT, which is Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transportation, and ISMM, which is Institute of Supplies and Materials Management. So those are the few roles she maintained. And beyond her professional achievement, she's also a good transformational leader and a good mentor who dedicate her time and expertise to guide next generation. And a very good speaker, right? And also advocate for women in logistics. So in addition to these roles, she worked as a senior lecturer at SLTC, conducting supply chain and operations module in our MBA program. So madam, we are privileged to have you for today's webinar. And without further ado, I would like to invite you to start the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Buddhi. And I think it is quite topical that you all have chosen this driving competitive advantage through supply chain excellence. So I just finished the first MBA that SLTC started on supply chain. So I'm sure those who are intending to join the MBA through SLTC supply chain, I'm sure MBA, they will be really be convinced why they should do study supply chain management, because most sometimes don't understand what supply chain does. I'm sure those who are attending today have some understanding, but what I'm trying to do today is to show why we should understand supply chain in a company properly and how can you drive your competitive advantage through supply chain. So I'll start a little bit about basics. Pardon me if all of you are very seasoned supply chain professionals. So let me start off with this, right? I mean, for any layman, we must understand from the time we wake up in the morning until you go to bed. Whatever we consume, whatever we experience as a service, whatever the event that we are involved, behind that there is a supply chain, right? I mean, look at even electricity, water. As you wake up in the morning, you go to the washroom and if the power is not there, if water is not there, or maybe bread for you to have breakfast, certain products are not there for you to have your breakfast, to make your breakfast. That is because supply chain has not really happened. So there is a lot of things happening behind the scene. I would say supply chains up until COVID, supply chain professionals were seen as backroom people, behind the scene, people who are working behind the scene. I think COVID really exposed the challenges that companies are faced, and that really showed the importance of supply chain. If not for supply chain people, no company would have survived, because we were all confined to our homes. without knowing what to do. We can't go out. But if we didn't have our supply chains functioning properly, we would have been starved to death. Luckily, we had systems in place in many companies, and we were able to get things to our doorstep by ordering online, by calling some organization. And that's what supply chain does. But having said that, it's very important to understand the difference between logistics and supply chain, because sometimes some people, even very senior people, use this word very interchangeably. Now, if you want to understand what supply chain entails or what supply chain involves, you must understand these different areas within the supply chain. So, what logistics does is, I'm sure all of you know what logistics is. Logistics is storage and movement of products and related planning of that. Now, what logistics does is power the supply chain, move the supply chain. Supply chain is much broader. It starts from the consumer, because you have to start with the consumer demand, and then you supply the demand through various stages of activities in supply chain. So, in powering the supply chain, logistics will really enable. So, supply chain is therefore bigger version of that. And I always say, we all now realize, I mean, all of us who are in supply chain, we know the value of what we do, but many in other functions, many ordinary citizens in the countries, they don't understand what supply chain does. So, what supply chain does actually is such an important role. If you don't have a supply chain, you can't survive. There is no life on this planet. And it is such an important area that we all must pay attention to. And that's why you really must understand supply chain is the backbone of an organization, right? So I'm sure you know why companies must pay such an importance to the supply chain function, right? Because it is a huge, key player. It actually brings huge value to the organization. And you will later on understand why I'm saying that. Now, as I mentioned to you, supply chains start with customers. Very often people say supply chain start with the suppliers. No, before you jump into suppliers, we must know what consumers want. Gone are the days companies start selling things. This is what I have, you take it or leave it. But now you can't do that because it's such a competitive environment. So many products are there, so many new services are there. So if you don't cater to the market need, your consumers will go to somebody else. So customers are really demanding because there is so much choice, so much visibility, and you have social media, you have technology. So there is so much at stake if you don't really understand the consumer demand. So once you understand the consumer demand, you have to work backward. We know this product has a demand. Then what you need to do is, how do I really meet this demand? So actually, supply chain starts with the customer. So it's so much so that I explained to you that technology also is playing a huge role. Walmart is the biggest retailer in the world, right? And they really go to the extent of tracking using cameras at the checkout point of a supermarket to see whether consumers, when they buy things and checking out products and leaving the supermarket, whether they are happy or not. They look at the facial expressions of people and see whether these people are satisfied or dissatisfied. And to such an extent now, companies are tracking consumer satisfaction. Because always, as a consumer, you must realize, you must get into the shoes of a consumer. If you go to a shop to buy something, what are the things you're looking at? Of course, you look at quality. You're worried about quality. If the quality is not right, you don't want to buy anything. You go to a shelf and you see some leaking pack, you don't want to buy that. And it is soiled, nobody wants to buy that. Of course, then you look at also the cost. Can I fit into my uh, purse, and can I afford this? Third thing is, whenever you go to any shop, okay, today you will buy things uh, from the shop near your home. Maybe tomorrow on your way back from office, you will go to a supermarket to buy. Or maybe someday at the end of the month, you try to buy your entire home household requirement. So wherever you go to, whatever the time you go to, whatever the quantity you want to buy, As a consumer, you expect that product that you want to buy to be there. Timeliness, availability is an important factor as well. So, if you really want to be happy about a product or a service, especially product, you need to ensure that companies who are supplying the product must ensure that the quality of the product is up to the certain level that you are promising. There is value for money for the consumer, and it is available wherever the place that this product is available, whenever the consumer goes there to buy that. So very important. If all three are there, you are very happy and you delighted. When you are delighted, you keep buying the product, keep going to the places that you bought. You know this company is very professional. They have the quality product. They are very cost conscious. They are making me happy, and they are very reliable because their products are always there. So that is how you gain confidence about a product. Now we are talking about today, how do you create competitiveness or value through supply chain? Because companies operate to make profits, of course, decent profit, while supporting other aspects like the societal aspects, the environmental aspects, all that, while making a profit. But how do you achieve competitive advantage? I'll use two special examples of two supermarket chains that we all know, Cargill's and Kiehl's, let's say. So they are competing with each other. Cargill's has many outlets, maybe 600, 700. Kiehl's may have lesser, let's say about 250 or something, right? So if you're a consumer who goes to the supermarket, how would you decide which one you would like to go? Now, as a company, they must decide who's my competition, right? Now, you as a company, you as a consumer, how you will decide is when you go to a shop to buy something, if the product is there all the time, at the same time, if the product that is sold in the place is meeting your cost expectations, because it's affordable to you, you can buy it. And based on that, you decide, okay, always go to this particular place, or I buy this product always because it meets my requirements. Now, from the part of the company, how would they know how should I be more competitive in the marketplace? Right? Now, as a company, you need to make sure you understand your consumer needs. Now, as a company, let's say, for example, if I'm manager of a top manager of a skills, what I will do is I must know what type of consumers come to my supermarket. And I must understand what are their needs, what kind of products they buy, what kind of age group, what kind of social strata of the population that they are from. Based on that, because certain people would go to a particular supermarket for various reasons. Maybe you will say this supermarket has a wide range and they have qualities better. All that is based on the consumer behavior and how it happens. So you as a company must see, how do I create value to my consumer who comes to my supermarket? If the consumer feels Kiehl's give better value than Cargill's, you will go to Kiehl's. So in the eyes of the consumer, what the consumer see, they have to get into the shoes of the consumer to understand. So you need to understand how organizations create value. So how do you create value? Because you have to differentiate yourself in the eyes of the consumer as opposed to your competition. That's when you decide, okay, I go to this place, not that. Because when you go to that shop, they are very courteous, their shelves are properly arranged, their products are always good quality, the ambience is nice, it's not smelly, it's very nice. They always have products on display. So for multiple reasons, consumer decides to go to Cargill's or Kiehl's as opposed to something else. So you as a company must decide, what is my competitive advantage? How do I create value? So therefore, you need to make sure whatever the products that I have, it has to be the right quality. It has to be value for money. It has to be available whenever the consumer comes. Not only early morning when the shelves are full. No, towards the closure of the shop also, product should be available. So they have to restock it, refill the shelves. Not only the value, consumers also, as I mentioned to you, is very conscious about the cost. Now, companies can become very cost efficient and be differentiating their product when they are very effectively managing their costs. If you're very uh, uh, let's say if your company is producing a lot of rejects, or if your company is not very conscious about the costs, if you're not using all your assets effectively, because your factory is always closed, idling, not operating, or you're always sending half truckloads, you're not efficiently using your trucks, your workers are not productive. So if you're not using your assets effectively, you cannot be cost efficient. So for you to create value, you have to be cost efficient. So you have to be differentiation in terms of cost must happen. So when both of these happens, your ability to operate at a lower cost than your competition, where you can get a higher profit, will enable you to be more competitive. If you're a company, let's say if Keels is more effective in managing their costs than Cargill's or other way around, you are in a position to provide better value. They will do more promotions, they will give more discounts, they will give better pricing in their products. And because they are not wasting, they are no have rejections, then obviously you can do that. Now, all these things happen in a supply chain environment. So if you want to show competitive advantage, you need to create value. You need to be different, differentiate yourself with cost. Through this, you can create a competitive advantage. So Michael Porter, famous management guru, said, you not only look at the entire organization, you need to look at different functions. You look at the whole entire organization to ensure that each and every element of the organization ensures that differentiation factor. So I hope you understand how a company is competitive or achieve competitive advantage over your competition through your value creation and cost differentiation, and all that happens behind the scene through supply chains. Of course, there are other functions, but bulk of the work happens through supply chain. So we'll go into more details later on. So I just want to summarize what is supply chain. So supply chain starts with the consumer, but after you get the consumer requirement, then you start with the supplier. You order material based on the demand that you got. And then from the supplier, you order material as per the negotiated price. And then it goes into a manufacturer. Then manufacturer will produce it. And then once you produce it, you store it in a warehouse, transport it, and keep it in a warehouse till such time order comes from your distributor or a retailer, whoever, directly or indirectly. And then through stores, you sell the product to your consumers. So basically, what supply chain does is you manage all your upstream, that is at the supply end, downstream at the customer end. There are so many stakeholders are involved. So if you don't really manage each and every relationship between supplier and manufacturer, manufacturing and warehousing, warehousing and stores, stores and customer, all of that, you will not really deliver value to the customer. So one of the very important aspects in supply chains that you need to understand is you need to manage the relationships well. If you don't manage your relationships well, obviously you will have a problem, because there will be always issues happening in supply chain. Your supplier may not send things on time. During COVID, we saw companies who really had good relationship with their suppliers, with other stakeholders. They were able to get a fair share of supplies without any delays, and they were prioritized over the rest of the other suppliers, clients. So all that because you manage your relationships well. So if you're in supply chain, you need to be a very good relationship manager, because everything that moves within the supply chain, you deal with some party. That party, if you don't understand the need of that party, you will not be able to understand. So I would like to show this picture, which I downloaded from the internet. If you really can't see it very clearly, you can yourself do a search in the internet with this heading, process steps for men's cotton slacks. Now, this is a very simple product, $40 cotton pant. And then this is in a shop. Now, how does this product comes to this shop? Now, this picture, if you really look at each and every step, now if it's a cotton slack, what is the starting point? If it's a cotton product, the starting point is a cotton farm. So the starting point is a cotton farm. Let's say if you're manufacturing something here, you will have your supply. Maybe if in Sri Lanka, if you look at, we don't have cotton farms. Maybe we are getting it from China, wherever, or India, wherever cotton farms are. So your supplier or the raw material comes from far away place. You have no visibility sometimes from what are the steps and time they has taken, because you may not be directly dealing with the cotton farmer. There may be somebody very closer you will be dealing with, not somebody at the start of the supply chain. So if you look at each and every stage, there are so many different stages. You harvest the cotton, then you take it in a transport vehicle to a wherever farm store. From there, you do the cleaning, separation, you bale it, and later on, there are so many steps. I'm not an expert in apparel industry. There are so many steps involved here, where you store, where you transport, where you convert it to a different higher value added product, all of it. Such a simple cotton pant, you have so many steps involved. Sometimes it's locally produced, sometimes it has to be shipped out to another country to convert into the next stage. Now, if you look at Sri Lanka, we don't have fabric mills as such. Okay, we have few, but if you're just importing the fabric roll, then you start somewhere here at the latter part, last lap in the race, relay. But there are so many steps involved here which you don't have any control. So that's why supply chains are so complex. You may be only sewing something, stitching something, and sending it to the supplier, but the original raw material, the raw form, may be so many steps and far away from you. And if you don't get that relationship right, if you don't understand the supply chain, if you don't have the visibility, you will have a huge problem. So companies will not survive if you don't understand your length and breadth of your supply chain. Very important to understand. And COVID taught us, I keep talking about COVID because COVID taught us that supply chain's visibility is such an important thing, because if you don't have transparency from where it is coming from, how it is coming from, which route you're taking, because you see now a lot of wars are happening around the world. If your shipment comes through Red Sea, or now you have Ukraine-Russia war, who thought soon after COVID these wars will, happen in all parts of the world? So your ship will have to be diverted. Now, if you don't know how your things are coming from your supplier, you will have a huge problem in understanding your supply chain. So you have to have a very good understanding of what's happening around us. Because if things don't move, obviously your company will collapse because you don't have things to produce. Such an important thing. So, in simple terms, I call supply chain with these 9 R's. If you get all these R's right, you have a fantastic supply chain without any problem. It's well oiled, like a machine. If a machine is very well oiled, obviously machine will operate without any noise, without any breakdown. Similarly, supply chains will also operate if you really understand what is the product you are producing. Because in a company, it's not only one product. Many companies will produce different versions of the product of the same thing. If you, for example, if you look at a toothpaste, or if you look at a soap, if you look at a different garment, you might have different designs, different size, styles. So the product in itself can be different varieties, right? So you must select the right product and sell it to the right person. So selecting the right item based on the customer requirement is very important. So the right product you must identify that the customer wants. And you need to source it from the right source. Because if you're ordering something, if you're a trader or a manufacturer, you need to make sure you get the right raw materials or right product, import it if you are sourcing like that. And when you're sending it, you must send it to the right person. Person A orders, but you send the person B's product to A. That cannot happen. In real life, this happens in a company. So mistakes can happen. So you need to make sure you have a checks and balances in organization. And it has to be delivered to the right place. Because sometimes if you're ordering something online, you will say deliver it to my office. Or if you're ordering something through Uber Eats or something, you will say deliver to my home or like wherever place. So depending on the place, if you don't really deliver to the right place, consumer will be disappointed. And of course, it has to be at the right price, because price is a very important part. And it has to be at the right time. If a company says, if an organization says, I want this to be delivered on this day or within 48 hours, you need to deliver it within that, right? Otherwise, you are disappointed. And of course, during the transportation, storage, manufacturing, you need to make sure the quality is ensured. Quality cannot get affected. Sometimes people say, no, when it left the factory, the quality was right. But during transportation, if you don't have the right procedures, guidelines, obviously things can go wrong. And consumer, when he or she receives it, the quality may not be right. So you can't say that, it left the factory well, but you have to ensure till it reaches the consumer, the quality should be right. And if somebody orders one full container, you should send one full container, not half a container or 80% of the quantity that you order. So if you order something, everything should be delivered on time in full, right? Quality, quantity at the right time. And finally, one of the important aspects in supply chains is the right way. If we had time, I would have asked this question from you and asked you to put something into the chat. Now, right way is supply chains are really taking a lot of resources. Supply chains also will have to ensure that everything is done in a very ethical and sustainable manner. So let's say, if you have a factory and you don't pay your workers decent salary, you don't give them the right environment to work, and there are international regulations and laws that you have to comply with. You don't pay their EPF, ETF, or you use child labor to operate that operation. So if you do these things that are not the right way, unethical way of doing things, nowadays, because social media is very strong, somebody can put a message and then everybody will know, and then you will be really unnecessarily getting your image will get tarnished. And I'm just showing a picture here. Even if companies sometimes say, I'm doing this and all of that, greenwashing is, you are saying you're sustainable, but you're just only doing it for marketing purposes only, but you don't really do anything to ensure that you're protecting your planet or environment. It's just a eye wash. So it's important. Supply chains are very long. Supply chains consume a lot of resources. Supply chain extract a lot of resources from planet Earth. So therefore, you need to do it in a more environmentally friendly manner. You need to also make sure it is done ethically. You comply with the regulations of the country, various regulations you have. You ensure that whatever you do it in a legal and an ethical manner. And then consumers will not have any issues with that. So now this is one new area that is coming up. So companies' reputation and image is something very important. I'm sure those who are looking at annual reports and all, you will see now you're having this ESG reporting aspects. So environment, social, and governance. So it is important under governance, these specific aspects are also being looked at. So coming back to the importance of supply chains, fairly old slide, but still it is relevant. You need to understand in a company what percentage of the materials that you import or locally source that goes into a product, what percentage of it is a percentage of the total product cost. Let's say you order your entire product cost is 100, and what percentage of the materials that goes into the product, costing the material. So example, if you look at when you're procuring certain raw materials and packing materials for your products, almost like 50 to 60% of your cost is raw material cost. And then you have the transportation, warehousing, and all of that cost. So depending on the industry as well as the profit that you are making, supply chain costs, because supply chain costs meaning all the raw material costs, warehousing, storage, transportation, factory operating costs, and all of that put together, supply chain cost is about bulk of the cost, that is 70 to 80% depending on the industry, right? And the profit that you're making. So if you really look at, if you're selling your product at 100 and your supply chain cost is 70 to 80 rupees, just imagine the power that you have, because you control 70 to 80% of your cost of your product that you market in the company. So if you reduce the cost, or if you efficiently manage your organization, the benefits that it can accrue to the company is huge, and it's a huge financial impact. The opportunity, the financial opportunity for the company is huge. So that is how you create value, because if you want to ensure competitiveness through cost efficiency, you need to make sure your supply chain costs are optimally managed, right? So supply chains, therefore, because if, like, accountants are very, very important people, because they are the people who will tell you whether you're making a profit, managing the finances, whether you're a loss making body or whatever, because they hold the key. Similarly, supply chain people only manage that amount of funds in an organization. Your decisions have a huge role for the company's profitability. So supply chains, if they are efficiently managed, it will give tangible business improvement, because you are the ones who will ensure whenever consumers order something, the product is manufactured and kept in a warehouse till such time consumers order, and that will enable you to increase your sales. If you remember, I said 9 hours, you have to, when order comes, if somebody asks for 100, if you produce 100 on time in full without the quality failure, you will increase your sales, because continuously you keep selling your products, your revenue growth will increase, right? And at the same time, you also have to make sure your assets are effectively utilized. Remember, I said if you want to get your competitive advantage, you need to make sure that your products are, whatever the assets that you have, are utilized in a more cost effective manner. So if you're having idle factories, idle warehouses, idle machines, obviously you're not managing your operations, right? And of course, you have to really look at how do I reduce the costs and increase my profits. So these are the three things. Just imagine in a company, these are one of the most important things that the companies are focusing on. So all this is driven by supply chain. Revenue growth, of course, salespeople also go and sell, but if you don't make the product available, they can't go and sell. So you directly control your sales growth. And if you are managing your assets effectively, that means you don't need to go and spend capital expenditure. So obviously, then your cash is, you are utilizing your assets, sweating your assets in such a way that you're prolonging the usage of asset without using additional capital expenditure. And then if you are reducing the cost, you are negotiating well with your suppliers, you are reducing your cost of production by reducing improving the productivity of people, productivity of usage of material, productivity of equipment, all of that, obviously will reduce your cost. When you reduce your cost, obviously your profits will go up. So I hope you understand the real creation of value happen through supply chain, and how does that happen. And at the same time, all these years, remember I said about customer delight. As a customer, what we are really looking at is quality, cost, and availability, or the service delivery. But recently, about 2 years ago, the Gartner organization, who really annually look at top 25 supply chains of the world, they do a ranking, and they actually identified, because now the world is so different to the world that we used to see before COVID. There are wars, there are trade wars happening, physical wars, and geopolitics, lot of things that are there that is hindering supply chain. So you have to not only look at quality, cost, and service in a very inwardly focused manner, you have to be externally focused as well. So you have to look at, how do I make my supply chain very sustainable or green? That's why the right way, the 9th R, right way. How do you manage your supply chain in a sustainable manner? Because resources are scarce. We don't have resources, infinite resources are not there. So you need to manage your resources well by optimally utilizing resources and looking at sustainable resources. Let's say that's why we are looking at solar instead of, um, whatever other types of fuel, non-renewable energies in factory operations, right? So how do you effectively use your water usage in the company? Can we recycle, reuse, remanufacture, repurpose the supply chain, various things? So those are things that we look at. And so many changes and volatilities are there in the supply chains now. So you as an organization must be quickly understanding these changes and quick to respond to that. So that's called agility. Your ability to quickly respond to the changing needs of the world that is around us. Because let's say if your COVID happened and then everybody was sourcing things from China, and therefore when China had a COVID pandemic, the entire world suffered. So now that is why everybody is now saying, okay, we cannot put everything into one basket, Chinese basket, because China is the factory of the world. And now everyone, after COVID, what happened was everybody started removing the factories and moving into India. Apple moved into India, part of the operation, and some of them moved into Vietnam, in some part of Southeast Asia. In Japan, in fact, incentivized their manufacturers to come back to Japan. Now you see what is happening in US now. Even Apple, Tim Cook, I think, the Donald Trump, the President Donald Trump, is pushing Apple, saying that okay, we will not charge, because they are producing their final Apple assembly in China. They said, okay, now without producing in China, if you produce it in US, we will give you concessions. So he's pushing, so that they are trying to make America great by bringing in more production back to US. And that way you're trying to make the supply chains more resilient, because resilient means to make supply chains very robust. How do you really make supply chains robust, right? Robust meaning if something happens, you are able to, without any breakdown, you are able to operate the supply chains. So if you have a backup plan, obviously you can manage your supply chains well. Because if something is not there, you need to have a plan B or a C. You cannot only have a plan A. If something goes wrong, you need to have a plan B and a plan C. If you're only managing with one supplier, if something happens, you don't have a supply. So you need to have a backup plan. And that's what a lot of companies did after COVID. You have China, you can't totally pull the plug out of China, but you started looking at China having their some percentage moved out. So if something goes wrong, then you have a backup plan and you don't have a total issue. Okay. So I'll quickly take you through in a supply chain, because it's very important to understand how this movement happened in a supply chain. Now, because as you have finance people, you have supply chain people, you have manufacturing people, you have sales people, all of these people are involved in managing an organization along with other functions. But you see how these things happen in a supply chain. There is a physical supply chain, and how that physical supply chain has to be aligned to the financial supply chain. Otherwise, you will not be able to manage this smoothly. Say, for example, if your consumer is ordering something through your retailer to the company, the order will be generated. Once the order is generated, what you will do is you have stocks in the warehouse. You will send the stocks along with an invoice to the retailer. Obviously, when the retailer receives something, retailer will acknowledge it and send a receipt saying that I received your stocks. Now that means you have made a sale. When you make a sale, what do you have to do? You have to collect money. How do you collect money? Physically, goods went into the retailer, but you have a certain agreement. Are you going to have zero credit, or you have a 30-day credit period or a 60-day credit period, whatever. And based on the credit period, you have given instructions to your bank to do the fund transfer. Excuse. So what is happening in a real financial supply chain is, when the physical movement of goods happen to the consumer through the retailer will have to pay the company. Now, when that happens, you have money. Let's say you upfront collect the money, right? No credit period, you have to pay upfront. And then now your stocks in the warehouse have come down because you have dispatched the stocks. So you have to now fill that stock. So you have to have inventory. Now to have inventory, you have to produce it. To produce, you have to order material. If you don't have enough stocks in the warehouse, you have to order. Now, when you're ordering raw material, you have a approved supplier with whom you have an agreement. You have an agreed price, agreed time period, agreed specification. Based on that, the product will be sent as per the agreed price with an invoice. Once you receive the material, you will have to acknowledge receipt like you have acknowledged saying that I received it. Then based on that acknowledgement and the quantity received, you will do a three-way matching in as accountants. They do that when you're making a payment, whether whatever that you ordered in the purchase order, whether the price is correct or whether the quantity is correct. And when you're uh, getting an invoice, you need to check whether the invoice has the right price and the right quantity, whether they have supplied the entire quantity. If all these three things are right and you accept the stocks into the warehouse through a GRN, obviously, then they will match all three and see whether, okay, you ordered 100 at the rate of 10,000 rupees per kilo. Okay, we got 100 per 10,000 rupees per kilo. And then obviously you have taken into stocks and you make the payment. Now, there again, you need to agree the credit period, right? Okay. Do you pay upfront or you order through an LC or a DP payment, whatever payment terms you decide. And then accordingly, you decide, okay, whether I pay upfront, whether I pay after 3 months, or automatically you give instruction to the banks to do that. Now, here, what I am explaining this so much is to show in an organization, cash flow is very important. Because for you to buy material, you need to have money. How do you have money? When you sell stocks. But if your stocks are stuck in the warehouse, you don't have money because your money is tied up in the stocks. So it's very important that when you sell things, you have to collect money, right? When you buy things, you need to take a reasonable time period to repay. And if you collect money upfront and take some longer period to sell, obviously you can manage through working capital management is very effective so that you can roll your cash in a way that you will be able to manage your financial supply chain in an efficient manner. So this is very interlinked in an organization because if your cash flow is right, you're managing your sales operation as per that and you will be able to manage. So there are three things that moves in a supply chain, which is very important. The product movement, there is this fund movement, and also the information. Because we must know how much have we received, how much are you selling, how much that needs to be supplied, what is the quantity, all that has to be identified. Okay. So I'll be quick. I have another half an hour or so. So we need to understand what are the supply chain functions. I'm sure you all must be aware. As I mentioned to you again, first, you need to plan. That is, first you must know what is the demand in the marketplace. That's the backbone. Based on the demand, you develop your supply plan. Based on the supply plan, you source materials. And then you have a production plan. For that production plan, you supply the sourced material and then you manufacture it. Then you store it and deliver it when they return it, when the consumer orders it. And then if they are unhappy, they will return it. Or sometimes you have a reverse logistics happening. For example, if you're like, okay, let's say if you're producing LPG gas, you need to collect your empty cylinders. Automatically, this is an inherent part of your supply chain. Empty cylinders will have to be collected for you to refill it. But certain industries, you don't. It's just a one-way thing. But if you're managing your supply chain in a sustainable manner, you will have some recycles, reworks coming in so that you may have to use it. So supply chains can be identified as plan, source, make, deliver, and return. Your suppliers can have similar things. Your customers can have similar things. But if you're a supermarket chain, you may not have everything. You may not manufacture. Maybe you will only source and deliver. Like if you take companies like Cargill's or Keel's, they have some of the products they produce also in a factory, their own factory. So you will have a mix of things. So it's depending on the organization you are in, whether you're a trader or a manufacturer, your supply chain functions will be different. So supply chain is such a vast area. There are so many things that is spanning across the organization, whether it is customer relationship management, whether it's demand management, whether it's order management, or manufacturing flow management, supplier relationship management, product development. So these are all very integral part of the supply chain. You have to. Immediate supplier is your tier one. That supplier supplies tier two. Consumer, customer, all of these are very, very important areas that supply chains will have to get involved. So another strategic thing that you need to look at in a supply chain to achieve your competitive advantage is your understanding with different stakeholders within the company, right? Now, each function has their own priorities in life. Let's say if you're a salesperson, your salesperson's role is to sell as much as possible. Now, they may want to achieve their target in the way that they want. But if you're in supply chain, you will have a problem. If they don't sell in the first few weeks and last week they try to sell the entire month's requirement, you will have a problem because you didn't plan it like that. You planned to sell it in a phased out manner, and maybe you will have a slightly increased sale towards the end of the year because people's salary will come to us 20th, 25th time. So accordingly, people will start buying monthly requirements. But if you don't order certain requirements initially and later on do that, you'll have a problem. So each function have their own way of operating and objectives are different. So let's say, for example, if you're a sourcing person, if you're buying things, you're a procurement person, your priority or your success would be identified based on how efficiently you're managing your costs. If you're the raw material buyer, my first job in Unilever, I worked in Unilever for almost 20 years. So in that company, my first supply chain job was a raw material buyer. So when I was buying raw materials, I had to really negotiate very hard with my suppliers to buy at the best price. Now, when you want to buy it at the best price, I have to ensure the cost efficiencies are there. So if I'm buying small quantities, the prices are not that good. But if you're buying bulk quantities, your costs are very efficient. So that is one aspect. But when you buy bulk quantities, there's an issue with warehouse people because they have no place to store, right? But when it comes to warehousing people, their priority is to have the entire spread of the product because whenever somebody orders, you have to have the products available. But same way, like in the procurement people, battery also wants to be very efficient in manufacturing, productivity improvement. So when you do that, they would want to produce large production, long production runs, large volumes. They will not like to do flexible production. They would not like to do small production runs. So these are challenges. And sales people and marketing people like to sell bigger volumes, right? So each and every one has their own individual objectives in a very silo-centric manner. So it's very important to understand these aspects when you're managing a supply chain. Because each and every one, if they're working in one silo, then you will not maximize the benefit for the company. Because if you want to derive value to the company, you do what is best for the company, not for your function. So what is best for the company, you might even have to compromise your functional agenda. So very important that you need to look at. So you have to break the barriers and break the silos and work as one team to ensure. So that's very important as well, right? So we are talking about the competitive advantage. Therefore, it's very important that the company, different functions also understand what is the company's mission, what is the company's vision. How do I connect that to the company's strategy? And how do I, in turn, will deliver through functional strategies? Because finally, organization has a certain vision and a mission, but that has to be delivered through your strategy. Now, strategy is overall, but then you have to deliver that through different functions. So if you're in supply chain, you need to make sure that your supply chain strategy is aligned to the company strategy. In turn, will help you to achieve your vision and mission delivery. So when you're developing the corporate strategy, you need to make sure that you have understanding from the people who are within the business who will give inputs. You have to get inputs from your consumers as well. So both inputs will help you to refine your strategy, and through that you will achieve your supply chain strategy. Now I will show you an example of a case study how supply chain strategy gets delivered in a company. Because without understanding this, you won't even know how do you create value. So it's very important. I just use this example because unfortunately local examples are not available in the public domain, and sometimes they don't like to showcase. So I picked up an international example, which some of this information is a bit 2 years kind of old. But this is Walmart. Walmart is the biggest retail chain in the world, actually. So they are, this was 2023 or 4 turnover. They are 611.3 billion US dollars turnover. I mean, Sri Lanka's GDP is now around $75 billion. Just imagine, they are like how many times bigger? Much bigger than Sri Lanka's turnover. One brand company in the US, they are much bigger than Sri Lanka's GDP. So that is the kind of size. And this company founder was in 1962, Sam Walton, set up this organization to really improve the livelihood of people, to make products which is more affordable to them. And they don't call people workforce members, they call it associates. They have 2.1 million associates. So 1/10 of the Sri Lankan populations work in those places, in that supermarket chains. And they are present in many countries. And 245 million shoppers visit their stores weekly. Again, more than 10 times of our population visit their stores weekly. So just want to give you a context of this particular organization. Now, how do they implement their strategy? So their mission was to provide value for their customers, right? So to do that, their tagline was everyday low price, right? So to deliver that everyday low price, that was provide value for their customers through the mission, the competitive strategy was that low prices every day. So they had to ensure, how do I create, that's their competitive strategy. How do they create competitive strategy for their low price? So they had two ways of doing it. One way was to reduce the inventory, because if you're running your factory in an efficient way, operation in a very efficient way, you can't carry huge inventory. You have to ensure your inventories are very low. So how do you do that? Because there are so many supermarket chains around the country and in the world as well. So how do you do that? So the first thing they did was, in order to track the inventory, they linked all the different stores through communication link. And later on, they connected them through EDI links, electronic data interchange. So they linked that. And then later they went into upgrade into satellite communication system. So it is said that Walmart has the most powerful satellite communication system, which is only second to the US Pentagon, the defense establishment. So they've gone into, although they are managing their operation in a very efficient way or efficient strategy adoption, they are able to do this through this connectivity. Because when you're connected, certain products in a different part of the country is not selling, and certain products, that same product is needed by another part of the country. So obviously then they have visibility, you can really rebalance the stocks. Then the second aspect was, because it's everyday low price, many people will then go into the supermarket. When they go into the supermarket, if the stocks are not available, people will be disappointed, right? That's why I mentioned quality, cost, and timeliness, or the availability, very important. So they ensured that the shelves are replenished within 48 hours. If something goes out of stock, within 48 hours, they will get it replenished. And to do that, what do? They looked at faster transportation system. Faster meaning not like a racing car, but they used a vehicle which is not breaking down. They use efficient transportation, long trucks, so that they will be able to do that. And they also pioneered cross-docking to quickly dispatch goods which are fast moving. And they also looked at focus locations to ensure that their stores are in high density areas so that people can quickly buy things from those places. So when you look at the strategy deployment, you'll see company had a mission. That mission was delivered through the competitive strategy. But this competitive strategy had to be driven through supply chain strategy. If it is sales, they would have had to deliver the sales strategy. So how they really connected the strategy into the supply chain, competitive strategy into supply chains. So this is how in companies create competitive advantage, because you need to see the connection. What is it that you need to do in order to ensure providing value for the customer? I hope it's clear to you. So this example is a clear classic area where if you really want to do the efficient supply chain, these are the things that you look at. So if you look at an organizational context, if you really, this is not a local company, it's an international company. This company, this is the top one, is the company strategy, right? Just want to show you a real life example after learning the Walmart example. See, this particular organization had 3 strategic objectives. One is to ensure customer service, leading edge customer service, that is 9 out of 10 from a customer score survey, and then improve the revenue reaching up to a certain billion turnover. Then how do you improve the margin and increase your profits? 10% increase in the margin. So that was the company's overall strategic goals. Now these goals have to be converted to supply chain strategies. Now, if you want to improve your customer service, you need to increase your delivery performance. If somebody orders 100, you must deliver 100 on time in full. So that's how you track. Then you look at customer service improvement. You look at how you are improving your delivery performance. Maybe currently you're at 70%. You need to increase it. You have a huge room to improve. Then how do you increase your revenue? 2 or 3 strategies you have, right? So they have identified, by aligning a sales strategy with planning, purchasing, and inventory strategy, they were able to, using sales and operations planning process, they were able to have integrated planning. And they also had inventory and health metric checks. So what I'm not going into details, what I'm trying to show is supply chain is such a strategic role whenever you are doing something for the organization, overall goal, and you drive it through your supply chain strategy. So if all these things, if it comes right, obviously your supply chain strategy will get delivered. So in that context, it's very, very important that you need to have a good understanding about your supply chain. Now, when you are working in a bank and when somebody goes to apply for a loan, bank people do a thing called KYC. I hope you know what KYC is. KYC is know your customer. You need to do an in-depth analysis about the customer, whether this person, whether it's an employed person, whether this person is doing a job or business, and do they have a decent salary? Can they repay this loan? So they do all this background check to ensure whether there is a risk in this loan disbursement. But like that, I coined this word KYS. You must also know your supply chain, because transparency and visibility of your supply chain is of paramount importance in a supply chain in achieving supply chain competitive advantage. Because if there is a disruption and if you don't know where your products are coming from, whether it is complying with certain requirements, all of that, you will have a huge problem. So the more you know about your supply chain, more you know about each and every aspects in your supply chain at different stages, better it is for you to quickly respond to any disruption. So these are some other things that I have listed here, so that you can ask from yourself whether do I know enough about my supply chain, and that will really help you to manage. So last few slides, I just want to explain, nowadays you see so many disruptions happening in supply chains, right? As I mentioned to you, one of the 6 focus areas in supply chains now is resilience. Because we know suddenly US has a new president, Donald Trump, And he suddenly wakes up and say, he just disregard all the WTO agreement and all of that. And he says, I want to impose 40% tariff for Sri Lanka. Or I want to put 50%, now 25% they had for India, and he has doubled it to 50%. And they had high tariff for China, and China protested probably. They have now given another extension by another 90 days for this decision to be implemented. So like that, lot of things are happening. Wars are being fought. So when you have that, you need to ensure that whatever you do, you need to ensure your supply chain is very robust. Supply chain, when it is robust, it will resist for any disruption. Even if it pass through your defenses and come back and attack you, you will be able to quickly recover. Resistance means how do you avoid it happening and getting disrupted? Or if it goes through your resistance mechanism and gets impacted, but how can you contain it not before becoming a big issue, right? And when it comes to recovery, you have to make sure you have to quickly come back to normalcy. So now all this is important because in a company, if supply chain is broken down, the entire advantage you had, competitive advantage, is gone. If you have a problem, competitive advantage is gone. So you need to make sure. That's why companies are now looking at a backup plan, BCP, business continuity plan. All this is very, very high level strategic decisions. This is creating value for the company because company will not exist if the company cannot supply things. Company is disrupted. Companies, entire companies come to a standstill. You can't do that. So supply chain has a huge role to do that. So therefore, in supply chains, we need to understand when some disruption happens, how much does it cost to the business? Let's say, for example, a shipment gets delayed and you're unable to produce, and therefore you lose your sale. Because of that disruption, you lost your sale by X many number of deliveries, which is quantified into rupees million. And then you can say that also led to this percentage of market share loss. So you need to identify the cost of disruption and tell the company or your board that, okay, if something goes wrong, it will cost you so many million. So in order to avoid this disruption, you need to invest in this much of things to bring it from red zone to the green zone. And the company might say, okay, no, we don't have funds to, take it from risk from red zone to green zone, but let's do it for what is the cost for the yellow zone. So you might take decisions based on fund availability, based on the risk, because you look at the actual risk and the risk appetite and decide, okay, this is what we can afford, and we just move on. So all these are strategic decisions in a company. Very, very important. And another important factor is companies have shareholders. Now, shareholders invest money expecting some return. So you need to create shareholder value, right? Now, if you look at some of these boxes here, financial terms, you guys are familiar with these financial terms, and every box, whatever you have, has a direct bearing on supply chain. And let's understand how the shareholder value is calculated, right? Now, shareholder value, at the end, you will get that. But how do you do that? Because you need to understand your net income and assets. Net income is a function of sales revenue over the cost of goods sold, right? So cost of goods sold is what it constitutes in the product. Maybe it is raw material, packing material, all that cost, right? Now, minus your profit. So that's the total cost. So that and the revenue will get you the net income, right? This minus this and you will get the net income. Then you also have to look at the assets, because you have the working capital, because inventory is anyway managed by supply chain. Working capital involves creditors, debtors, and inventory. So inventory is directly managed by supply chain. Cost of goods sold, 60 to 70% controlled by the supply chain. Sales depends on the product availability. If it's there, they will also go to town with it, right? And then physical capital. Supply chains also have the utilization of factory costs, factory, warehouses, and then in retail store spaces and all of that. So that actually constitutes on assets. And net income over this, and then you will get the profit, economic profit. So economic profit is profits less the cost of capital needed to generate that profit. So through that, you will achieve your shareholder value. Now, just imagine all these key ones: sales revenue, cost of goods sold, working capital, physical capital, all of it supply chain contribute. So you create actually significantly shareholder value, because shareholders are very happy if he gets a return. So then that return is coming, bulk of it coming via supply chain. So very important. So this is a huge impact that you create to a company. And research has been done to show that poorly performing supply chains typically destroy shareholder value by an average of 8.6%. So if you don't manage your supply chains in a very efficient and an optimal manner, you will actually destroy shareholder value. Then they won't be able to be with you, because nobody would like to be with you investing their money without a gain for them. So these are things that you need to really use. Finally, I'll show you one important slide to show you how you create value through supply chains using 6 C's, right? Like everything starts with C. So let's start with one C, that is, in a company, for the company to be successful, you need to sell your products and achieve your turnover. So how does supply chain create value? And then what is the connection to the turnover? So if you optimally provide customer service to all your customers, obviously you will be able to manage your turnover, because products are available and you are there supplying the goods on time in full, or you make it available on the shelf, and obviously that will help you to achieve your turnover. That is the first C. Second C is the cost. How do you reduce the cost? What are the costs? Material costs, distribution costs, factory operating costs, business waste, all of it. So you need to make sure everything is optimally looked at and reduced, right? Obviously, that will realize your profits or the surplus that you are generating from that particular project. And then one of the important thing is cash flow, because cash flow, without that cash flow, you won't be able to manage your supply chain, because it's a rolling of your whole cycle, right? So inventory, creditors and debtors, obviously direct bearing on the cash. So you don't supply chains don't directly deal with debtors, but other two areas are entirely in the supply chain domain. Not only these 3 quantifications, but you also have to ensure these other C's: collaborations, compliance, and carbon. Carbon meaning carbon footprint reduction, because we have to ensure our supply chains are greener. We must ensure there are so many stakeholders. Therefore, we need to collaborate with each other. And not only that, we need to be ethical and sustainable. Therefore, we need to comply with not only the local, but internationally also, wherever possible. So this is how, because what I normally do is, the very first thing I ask a question from my students, always, especially younger students: how do you tell somebody, how do you create value for the company? So that you have to be able to explain and articulate, then that will help you to really gain some mileage about your capability and your contribution to the company, and how it creates the competitive advantage. So finally, what is important is supply chains are very important. Supply chains have to be future ready, and you have to ensure supply chains are very robust. Because if you want your company to be really moving in the right direction in this ever changing environment, your supply chains have to be future proofed. You can't totally future proof it, but you need to make sure that your supply chains are fully understanding the challenges that are faced by supply chains. And then it is really directly working on it. Because are you going to be a victim of disruption when something happens? Or you're going to be a disruptor? And again, I'm going back to COVID. A lot of companies who were making garment, they just change away or change into mask manufacturing or overall like that. So they just quickly pivoted without being a victim of disruption. They became a disruptor in the market. So likewise, there are so many different companies that has evolved and made use of that opportunity. Even currently, the issue that we are faced with in the tariff with US, and we've got like 25 to 45 range, but we need to make sure what are the new opportunities that are coming our way. So through that understanding, you will be able to create value, right? So supply chains are such an important area in a company, and it is the backbone. It is actually driving, it's a huge cost. And if you really efficiently manage your costs, efficiently manage your service, you can be a force to reckon with, and you can be really a disruptor in the market. So I'm sure you understood the importance of supply chain, how strategic it is. It's not a backstage role anymore, because every day we go through a lot of challenges globally. And if you don't understand your supply chain, if your bosses and senior people in the organization understand the importance of supply chains, it is really sad, because they will suffer in the end, because supply chain is an integral part of a company. And if your supply chain is broken down, obviously company will not survive for a long time. So this is why we have to understand the strategic role and how supply chain creates value, because through that you will be able to push the decision makers to really move in this right direction, so that you engage with all the stakeholders, you engage with all the uh, players in the supply chain, and then try to manage your supply chains. So I hope, sorry for the initial delay, but I hope you're still there. I know still there are 23, and that's good news. So I'm just trying to conclude. If you have any questions, you can ask. But otherwise, we can just close for the day. Okay. So any questions if you have, or maybe Buddhi, I don't know whether you're still there. If you're there, we can look at any questions.
Yes, madam. So we can allocate 2-3 minutes if you have any questions. So
I took about 15-20 minutes more. Sorry about that. But I think it's important that you understand the value that supply chain creates in an organization. Either it was perfectly clear or it was not clear at all. So
I think that is the reason, ma'am. So it is very perfect. And and then again, so since we don't have any questions, so thank you very much, ma'am, for sharing very valuable thoughts regarding supply chain and the competitive advantage. So thanks again for accepting our invitation. And I know you are really busy with all the other works, right? So thank you again for accepting our invitation and start to do our this webinar. Thank you again, ma'am.
Thank you everyone for the positive feedback. Let's create value. Let's create value. Yes.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you, ma'am. Okay,
Good
have a good
night,
night, ma'am.
everyone. Okay, bye.